Welcome to Boss Talk, the show where we talk about selling businesses. My name is Jim Parker. This is my business partner, Carey Sobel.
And today's episode 3 is what buyers are looking for in a good business. Now, the word good in nature is subjective, right? It's subjective on who is actually analyzing what is good. So buyers is also subjective because buyers have different motivations. If it's a Main Street business, a buyer may be buying a job, buying exactly what that owner of the business was doing before. Or a buyer could be a large private equity group that's looking for a strategic acquisition. What I'm saying is good is subjective. However, universally speaking, the things that people look for in what is a solid business is universal in its nature, right? So the first thing that people will probably look at when they're analyzing if a business is good or not is it financially stable? What do the financials look like? So while that's probably true, Jim, let's dive a little bit into what is considered a good financial business. Beyond just does the business perform well financially?
Well, I think the first thing that grabs a buyer's attention, if it's a Main Street business and you're going to the market at the price, is the price. So many businesses out there are priced too high, and those are the ones that don't sell. We talk about it all the time on this show. The 10 to 20% of businesses for sale sell. 80 to 90% of businesses for sale do not sell. And there's many, many different reasons for that. But it starts with price. So that's like the most critical thing right out of the gate. Is the business has got to be priced right. If the business is not priced right and they're looking at an EBITDA number or a discretionary earnings number versus the sales price, and it doesn't make sense, they won't read another word. They won't even move on from there.
Yeah, and the topic of that business valuation is critical, and we could talk about it for hours and hours and hours. We will have a session where we dive deep into business value and what the difference is of SDE and EBITDA, which we're not even going to touch today.
No.
But at the end of the day, when we talk about a business being overpriced, it's a business should sell at a certain dollar amount. And a business's value is what somebody is willing to pay for it. I've said that before. But we have to have a starting point of where we're going to bring a business to market. And when we're analyzing the financials of a business, we're not just looking at top and bottom line sales, right? We're looking at so many different other patterns and so many different other things inside of a business's financials.
Yeah, and the first thing, once we get past the price, which that is the critical thing, but when we start looking at the actual financials, what buyers want to see is they want to see a stable business. Exactly. That's what they want to see. They want to see trends. Is the business trending up? Is the business trending down? Obviously, if the business is trending down, they're like, ugh. But at the same time, if the business is taking leaps and bounds and it's growing really, really quickly, the buyer is going to, if it's doing it for multiple years, that might be one thing. But if it jumped up 1 year over another year, they're going to be questioning, is that likely to continue?
So is growth stable? Is decline stable? Is it a flat line, and then maybe there's business. A 1 year bump up? Like, you look at the trends, and you have all these analysts that are diving into numbers super deep, and you're looking at it in a graphical format or in some type of chart. Where are the outliers, right?
And what's the story behind the trends, right? Yes. I mean, that's a big thing too. Like, a lot of the business owners that we deal with right now, 40%, look at this number, it's from Forbes magazine, look this up. 40% of all business owners in the United States right now were born before 1964. That means 40% of business owners out there in the country right now are 60 years or older, and they're looking to retire. And this goes back into the trend situation as I deal with. I don't know about you, Carey. I'd love to hear your thing. I talk with a lot of sellers that, they've been like, what? I'm happy with the level that I reached. I got to it. I grew my business. I owned it for 25 years. But in the last 5 years, the last 7 years, I hit a certain number and I've been happy. I didn't want to grow it anymore because I didn't want to deal with the stress of growing it, and bringing on more people. I just hit a level where I'm really, really happy, and I've just kept it there. So when you look at a business that's stable like that and just completely level, that's a story you can tell a seller or tell a buyer.
And you bring up a point that I have experienced myself and experience often. I have a call today on a business where the owner of the business has ran it for 30 years, and he has never marketed, he has never advertised, he's never had a salesperson. It's been all organic growth. They've grown because they do the same thing, and they do it really well, and they hit their promises. But what I'm selling is they've never tried to grow the business. right?
Yep.
So that flat line, to your exact point, doesn't mean the business doesn't have an opportunity to grow.
Right.
So there's a story behind all of the numbers.
And if it's a declining situation, the numbers are declining year to year, if it's because the industry's not doing well or the business is just on a downhill, that's one thing. But if there was a health issue with the business owner, yes, you will take a hit on the price. I'm sure you will when you've seen declining numbers like that, but maybe not as a big of a hit if the business is just taking a hit, is just going down because
for
of
no
outside,
other reason.
Yeah, for outside sources or the business is in decline. But you see, but the story behind the trends is critical.
Yeah,
Carey.
And I think a business, the main factor, and challenge me on this if you think I'm wrong. The main factor of what a business will sell on is based on its historical performance financially. Right. But there's so many other attributes to make a higher multiplier or a lower multiplier, and this is all of the context that we have to pull in. So financials are definitely what a business is good. If it's labeled good, it's because of its historical performance. But there's also so many other benchmarks, right? We talked about stability of revenue, talk about profit margin, gross profit margin, ability to collect your accounts receivable, controlling costs. There's so many other things packed into the financial aspect of it being a good business. But ultimately, the business's historical performance is the main thing we're looking at. Right.
And obviously, to sum it up in that scenario, a business is seeing steady growth from year to year to year, and it's not huge swings. That's what buyers want to see the most. And outside the financials, on the same thing of the financials, is not just looking at their financials, but benchmarking it.
Right.
And benchmarking, if you don't know what benchmarking is looking at a subject business like this, and like yours, if you're looking to take it to the market, and we can then look at what the industry averages are as well to see how you're comparing against the average industry. Are you better on cost of goods or lower on cost of goods? Is the profit margin higher or lower? What the labor costs look like? That type of a situation. And if you're overperforming by a lot, that's gonna be
raising a flag.
That's raising a flag.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have to kind of find out the story behind that. As how are you able to beat the benchmarking by so much on these things? So.
Sticking on financials, let's talk about record keeping.
Oh,
right, because this is a big one.
Yeah,
and we'll do a whole topic on record keeping, on the books clean, a lifestyle business versus a non-lifestyle business. But when you're in due diligence, how easy is it to understand the financial picture of what's going on? How clean are the books?
Right.
We see this all the time. Let's dive right into a lifestyle business, right? So people that own businesses. And I say you can only win once, okay? You can win once by paying Uncle Sam less year over year when you're trying to reduce your taxable income. And you do that to save on what you have to pay in taxes year over year. But then when you go to sell, you have to uncover all of those things, and it makes it a little bit more difficult. Whereas if you run a business that's not a lifestyle business, which I'll define in a moment, and at the end of your tenure of owning the business and you want to sell it, the books are super clean. There's a ton of profit on the bottom line. It's easy to read. You don't have a lot of add backs. You can expect to generally exit for a higher purchase price because all of that information is crystal clear.
Yeah.
Now,
before going, let me explain real quick. I'm sorry, Carey.
No, please.
To explain what add backs are. Carey mentioned a word, add backs. So, obviously what you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce your tax liability. Your CPA is trying to reduce your tax liability. And what sometimes business owners do is that they run expenses through the business that maybe are not true business expenses in all the sense of the word. So what we're doing with one of the businesses, we're looking at the net profit of the business and we're adding back certain things. If it's a Main Street or an upper Main Street business that is going to be an individual buying the business, we can add back the owner's salary because we're assuming that whoever buys the business is going to be taking over the owner's salary.
Yep.
We can add back interest expense because your interest is going to be paid off at the end of or your loan's going to be paid off, at the closing table, so the buyer's not going to be taking over that loan. We're going to add back depreciation or a portion of depreciation depending on the CapEx expense.
So, just for where we're at today, it's probably a good touch on what makes a good business from finance.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about business continuity. And there's a lot to unpack here on this one. So one of the hardest things that I have to deal with as a business broker is when I sit down with a business owner who has ran his business for a significant amount of time and is heavily involved in the business. almost to the point where he is the business, right?
Or she.
Or she. You take the business owner out of the business that's running the business, and the business doesn't run without that person, that business's value significantly decreases for so many different reasons. So we can go into some remedies for this, but a business owner may come to me and say, I've worked X amount of time on my business and I think it's worth X, and I have to tell them that it's worth Y, and the main reason is because of them. That's a very difficult situation to have. So one of the ways that we try to remedy that is when a business owner is preparing for sale, I always try to encourage that business owner that the less involved you are in the business, the more valuable that the business is going to be. What is one way to remedy that? Have standard operating procedures, well-documented processes and systems. So if you, Mr. Business Owner, if you, Mrs. Business Owner, gets hit by a bus, that business still operates. Mm-hmm. So this could be, and it may take a little while for the business owner to start to draw back their involvement in the business, but at the very least have well-documented process and systems of what that person is currently doing. When you walk into the business every day, what does your day look like?
And it's scale. You got to look at the scale. I mean, the probably the most appealing situation, especially to private equity groups. And I don't deal with private equity groups. I'm an upper Main Street business broker. I usually sell businesses that are going to sell between $1 million or that have gross sales between $1 million and $10 million. But the private equity groups, they want a situation like what Carey was talking about, where the seller is either not going to be involved or is going to post-closing stay on post-sale and be involved, or an employee can actually step up and take over their role. And then you got on the other side of this of the spectrum is that you've got that owner that is the business, like Carey was talking about, that's taking an interior design company, and maybe they have an assistant and that is it. People are hiring that company because of the interior designer themselves. Mm-hmm. Even if you found a buyer that was an interior designer, it'd be a very hard sale to do because the customers are. It's just an industry you're putting that faith in. Yeah. And somewhere in that middle road is a situation where, most of the businesses especially the businesses are going to sell for, a few $1 million or right around there, where the seller is playing a critical role in the business because they're working in a certain position, but they've got the employees around them that can do everything else. But the main thing is, and that's okay, because we're assuming in that situation that whoever buys the business is going to be taking over the owner's role in the business.
Right.
That's okay. You don't necessarily in that situation can have the owner. The owner doesn't have to be completely taken out of the business, but you don't want the owner to be in a situation where the customers and the clients are coming because of the owner.
Yes.
They're coming because the company itself is doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're giving them an excellent service, giving them an excellent product, whatever it might be, but they have the systems in place.
And you see it a lot in service-based businesses too. And I'll give you an example of what we're talking about to segue into maybe having a skilled workforce. So there's a business owner who called me recently. He owns a HVAC business and he also does refrigeration. And we start talking. He sends me his financials. He says, everything looks pretty good. You have great growth year over year. He went from like 300K to 500K to 800K. And I started asking him in gross sales. And I started asking him, all right, let's talk about your staff. And he goes, well, I don't really have any staff. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, my son helps me with the business now and again, and I find some contractors here to do the work, but it's mostly me.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. Well,
that's really hard to sell that type of business.
But not only this, but there's no business phone number. It's the owner's cell phone. The owner gets the calls. They call the owner's name instead of the business name. He goes out, he does the sale. He goes out, he does the work. He goes home, he generates the invoice. He chases down that money, and then he goes and gets the next one.
Yeah.
He was the whole business.
Yeah, he is the whole business.
And he didn't pay himself a salary, so he was just taking profits. So there was a considerable amount of profit at the bottom line. And he goes, my business is doing a couple $100,000 in revenue. Shouldn't I be able to sell it?
Right.
And I said, well, what do you plan to do when you're done? He goes, retire. I go, are you willing to stay on for a period of time? He goes, well, Carey, I'm retiring. I don't want to work anymore. said, you have a problem.
Yeah, he does have a problem, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's really sad. I talked to a business owner years ago now that was, I think it was like 72 years old, and he wanted to sell his business and retire, and I had to break the news to him that I thought it was unsellable. It was a very hard conversation to have because that was all the money he had.
Yep.
He hadn't saved any money.
That was the same situation I experienced with this one.
And it's heartbreaking.
It hurts.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But the owner doesn't have to remove themselves completely from the business. They can be you can be there working full time. It's just, can somebody else that has really good business experience and background come in and take your role?
Yep.
Or is the business being driven because of who you are?
Yep.
So
for this business owner, instead of saying just no, which is what we talked about saying, I said, you got a 2 to 3 year runway. He was in his 60s, his early 60s, and I said, here's what we need to start doing. You need to hire a skilled workforce around you. You need to start outsourcing your accounting. You need to transfer your number of your phone number to a business number. You need to spin up a website. You need to build some clout in the goodwill of your business's name. And know that you can work towards an exit. You're just not there yet. So it was about talking about to build the business.
I have just met an excellent business consultant that specializes in the trades, and also have contact with somebody that is a marketing guru when it comes to the trades. So if you want that number, I'll pass it on and get them involved.
I love it.
Because what we're trying to do, what Carey and I are trying to do, is we're trying to help guide the business owners that maybe not right there to sell, saying, hey, these are the things you need to fix. But we're not like consultants that we're going to sit there and help you get those things fixed. But we can point you, or we can put you in contact with somebody that can be that business consultant for you. But we'll advise you from a broker standpoint, and then we can stay in contact with you every year, do an updated broker's opinion of values and giving you advice. But
Absolutely.
I'm getting off subject. I'm advising myself.
No, it's right on the same thing. It's right on the same thing. So let's talk about continuity, having a skilled workforce and some key employees, right?
Yeah.
So having a nice, well-oiled machine of a large staff or even a small staff of skilled employees, a lot of times when they've been with the business for 10, 15 years, they have a great relationship with the owner comes in and hits them with a brick over the head and says, by the way, I've sold my business. Mm-hmm. Here is your new boss. It's a challenging situation. So a lot of times you can remedy that by and we don't usually encourage telling any of the employees or even key employees sometimes about a sale, but sometimes it's necessary. Letting them know if an owner is in his 70s, hey, I'm sure you can look at the situation. I've about gotten to the point of the end of my professional career, and I'm going to go on and retire, and I'm going to start a business sale process. I'd like you to be involved in it, mm-hmm. or I'd like to bring it to your attention. Some ways that you can remedy key employees, but key employees staying in is almost always a question that a buyer asks. When you are going to leave, Mr. Seller, beyond your familiarization period? When you are not going to be there, Mrs. Seller, anymore to help hold my hand? Are there key employees in the business that have 10 years operating that could step up and take your role, or that can help facilitate the knowledge transfer to myself?
The workforce situation is extremely important. I would say probably 99% of the businesses that I sell, the employees do not know the business is for sale until the day of closing. We want to keep that confidential. But, it's something that we need to discuss, and it's something that the buyers want to know. Is there a huge turnover of employees where you're constantly turnover, or is there a stable, workforce that stays there? And sometimes that's dependent on the industry.
Of course.
Restaurants are, that turnover, this is a huge turnover. That's 300% turnover a year. That's all the time. Lawn and landscape, the workforce that's actually maybe not the managers and the grounds, but the actual laborers, they can be a quick turnover. We're talking more of your key positions at the company. What does that look like as far as turnover? And the longer that they've been working there, the better. But they also, are they going to stay on post-closing, like you said?
Yep.
What are their ages? If you're talking about your key employees being, in their late 60s, early 70s, it's going to scare a buyer.
And these are things that we can help prepare a seller of saying, if you have other folks that are looking like they're going to retire, is there an understudy behind them that you can start elevating them?
Exactly. We're not saying you get rid of those people. You probably have a great relationship with those people. They may have been with you for a long time. I'm not urging you to get rid of them before the sale because you want to get somebody younger in there. Not by any means at all. But like Carey said, getting somebody in there that's an understudy that can kind of learn underneath of them, and maybe they take kind of a parallel role or something like that. But the workforce is huge.
So continuity in general is always a big concern and a big topic in what can define a business as good or not. And continuity also will move into a next category of customers or client base. And so many times you see a business that's so reliant upon one customer or one relationship, or there's a huge customer concentration issue, parsed revenue where you're not getting repeat business from the same companies that are coming to you. So let's talk a little bit about balance of revenue, because I think that's a big item. I think what I see a lot of times from private equity groups or family offices, one of their requirements for their business that they're going to try to acquire is there is no business that makes up more than X% of total revenue. We see that pretty often.
Yeah. And kind of the key number, the number could go all over the place, but the key number usually is around 10-15% of your revenue should not come from one client source. I have sold businesses that have client concentration that's higher than that. I'm actually in contact or working on a listing right now with a great business where they have much higher client concentration than that. But then you're getting into a situation where you have to be more strategic, because the last thing you want to have happen is a buyer comes along and they're looking at the business and they're like, oh my gosh, they got one client that makes up 35% of the business. I buy that business. What happens to that one client? Walks out the door, and I lose 35% of the business overnight. And I've got a loan to pay back for the business acquisition, and of course I've got my normal expenses. And I bought the business to make some money. Whoa! Look at that! I'm knocking over my mic and everything.
You got excited about.
I did get excited. That's
pause.
Well, holy cow! We don't need to pause. So. That's what a buyer's concerned about is that high client concentration. But what you can do, like I said, I've got one going on right now that I'm looking like I'm going to be taking to the market. We can kind of get around that type of a situation, but now we're talking about things like forgivable seller notes. We're talking about where you as a seller, if you're dealing with high client concentration in your revenue and you want to take it to the market, you're gonna have to give up something to make that buyer feel comfortable in order to doing that. And usually it'll be something like a seller's note or something equivalent, or a hit on the price, whatever it might be. So if you're looking to sell a year, 2 years, 3 years out, 5 years out, that's one thing that I would concentrate on right now. If you have high client concentration, is start to cut back on that. And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying go out there and fire your best client. That would be dumb. But go out there and get more clients and try to bring on more people, so that just reduces the overall percentage of revenue for that particular client.
And I want to add something onto that too, is a lot of times the owner of a business represents the relationship with that high value customer, right? So
Start moving that.
Move that, exactly.
Move that to somebody else in your company.
Exactly. We want them to call the business phone number.
Business.
And say, I'm calling business name X instead of calling John that owns the business. Hey, John, can I get an order for blah, blah? No. Call the office or call my sales administrator. A lot of times, though, that sales function does rest with the owner. And I always encourage an owner, if they manage that sales function, form a sales team underneath you. Maybe you generate the leads and pass it off to a sales team to close. We want to try to get the business to be, the goodwill of the business to be generating those sales instead of the owner of the business.
And you know what, Carey, I know I'm getting off a subject on where you're heading down this path, but it made me think of something that when you were talking about, the owner usually does the sales. The best situation to be in is when the owner is not doing the actual production. That the owner is either doing sales or the business side. You know what I mean? They're concentrating on scheduling and managing and sales and that type of stuff, not actually doing the physical work.
That's a great point.
Because that's the situation now that you can bring a buyer in that maybe does not have direct. Let's take an HVAC business for sale, for instance. You got an HVAC business. They're hot businesses right now. The multipliers on those are really high. The industry's being consolidated as we're talking. So if you got an HVAC business, give me a call or give Carey a call. But if the owner is out there servicing the AC units, it's not as appealing as when they are sitting in the office and they're doing the scheduling and the training and estimating and that type of a thing. And now we're in a situation where a buyer may not have to have direct HVAC experience. They just are really, really good business people. They're coming from the corporate world where they have, have done really well in the corporate world. They're making a good salary, a couple $100,000 or more. They have a good net worth, and they've just killed it in the corporate world. But they're in their 40s and 50s, and they're going, you know what? They're thinking to themselves, you know what? I've always wanted to own my own business, and I'm tired of making, other people money, and I'm not getting any younger. I want to go out and acquire a business. Those can be the best buyers that you can find out there. And that's a situation where the buyer can come in and they're just a good business person. They're coming in and maybe they don't necessarily have direct experience in the HVAC repair business themselves. But the infrastructure in the company's there. You've got enough technicians there, blah, 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 blah.
And just like the example I gave you earlier where the owner, it was an HVAC business. And I said he made the sale, but then he went and worked on the actual, repair
units,
work.
And he did everything.
And what he said to me was when he said he was retiring is he goes, I can't do the manual labor anymore on the actual equipment when I'm going in to service it. But I would still stick around and do some sales. I'm really good at that. So that's a perfect example of what you were talking about.
Yep.
So we talked about balanced revenue of clients not making up a certain percentage, but what about recurring revenue? That's really attractive.
Ooh, that's
really
exciting.
attractive.
Yeah.
So I think businesses sell. I know businesses sell at a higher multiplier when there's either really strong contracts, but when those contracts have recurring, repeatable revenue for X amount of years going forward, that's obviously going to have a higher value than it is of one-time contracts.
Yeah, where you're constantly going out and beating the street to get a new, get the next deal or the next job.
Software businesses sell at a high multiplier because you assign a software as a service or SaaS models where you're paying $99 a month, or maybe it's a low ticket of $9.99 a month. But typically, most people let those things just keep hitting their credit card. And business acquirers, when they look to acquire a business, if they see that recurring revenue,
they love recurring revenue, and it doesn't have to be like computer. You can take things, lawn and landscape. The maintenance portion of the business, recurring revenue,
pools
every month. Pools, same thing. Or it could be an automotive repair business that has a couple fleet accounts where they're repairing the fleet for a couple different corporate companies. Just that recurring revenue. Buyers love that. They love that.
So we're talking about continuity. One more point to add to this is just having a loyal and strong customer base. Even if it is not recurring revenue, but you have a pattern of a dry cleaning business, and the same clients come in, once a month, 3 times a year, 5 times a year, whatever it may be. You can go into a business's CRM and see that they have a repeating history of clients coming back to that business. Those are the things that make a good business.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you, Carey. It can even be, it depends on the business. It could even be that it's not necessarily, customers coming back. It could be, but just as long as there's a proven method. We do this and we get customers. And it's been proven over and over and over again that do this, you get customers. Do this, get customers.
So when we
and not just one source, but many sources.
And when we talk about what buyers look for in a good business, and we've talked about this quite a bit in almost all of our episodes so far, it's about people, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just about the business, it's about the seller. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at what makes a good business. There better be a good seller behind that business. Are they honest? Are they trustworthy? Do they have a good motivation to sell? A lot of times we get the knock at the door and someone says, I want to sell because I just want out. I just want to go get a ticket and make some money and move on. Is that good motivation?
Carey, I'm telling you, I know we talk about this all the time, and I don't mean to offend anybody out there. I really don't. it's critical. It is critical that a buyer likes and trusts a seller. It's really hard to sell a business when a seller is not likable and they're not trustworthy. First of all, I won't list a business like that. I need to be able to sleep at night. I need to be able to sleep at night. I need to know that I'm putting good deals together for good people. And I want, when we're all done and said, I want the seller to get a really strong price for their business. I want them to move on with their life, their next chapter, and them to be excited. And I also want them to feel like the buyer that took over is going to do well with their legacy and continue the name that they created and continue that whole operation. But it's critical. Carey, I turn down businesses all the time that are good businesses, but I'm like, I don't trust that seller. Mm-hmm. And one, I don't like them. And it goes like for multiple reasons, like, the smallest one being, is this somebody I really want to work with for months, and be really engaged with. But it also goes down to like, I want to make sure that I'm not getting involved in a situation where I put a deal together and maybe they're not the most honest person. Yep. But it's as simple as this as well. If I don't like and trust the seller, chances are the buyer is not going to like and trust the seller. Right. And you know what? The buyer, I'm telling you, the buyer, this is not like selling a house. When you're selling a house, the buyer could care less who owned the house. Right. When they're buying a business, it is so important that they like and trust the seller because they will do their due diligence. But at the end of the day, they're taking a leap of faith on a lot of things. And I don't know. I've had years ago when I listed businesses for sale, I always had to trust somebody. But sometimes I didn't have to actually like the seller. But I can't tell you how many times back then when I did that the buyer was like, I just don't like the guy. It's not somebody I want to buy a business from. And it's not somebody I just don't got a good feeling. Yep. That likable and honest and trustworthy. It's huge. Yep. It's huge.
So it's safe to say
that's the way we live life,
right? It makes a good business if the seller is a good person.
Yes. They got to be a good person.
And we always want to know how long has the business been around.
If you're a jerk, call our competitors. No, I'm kidding.
Yes. Should we name a couple of them? No. So has the business been around for a while, right? Is there good tenure behind it? Sometimes you have these serial entrepreneurs that start a business for a couple years. There's not a lot of infrastructure around there, and they go, I just want to flip it and move to the next thing. Right. Probably not a good business to sell. Another scenario is multiple owner situation. Right?
Well, let's talk on the tenure real quick, if you don't mind, because I think that's huge. I mean, it's really hard to own a business for 6 months and then be like, I want to sell the business. I mean, I don't get involved with those kind of transactions. There's brokers that are, and you can sell them, but it makes it really, really, really hard to sell. The longer the business owners own the business, the better it is. Without question. If they own it for 25, 30 years, buyers love that. They love that.
Well, let's say a buyer bought a business, so now they're the seller. They operated for 8 months, and now they want to sell it.
Red
flag.
Yes.
Why?
Red flag.
Yeah. Unless there is a extenuating circumstance of why they need to now sell it after 8 months of operating it, chances are they didn't actually enjoy that business, or there was a skeleton in the closet in that business, or he's just trying to move on to the next thing, and he didn't do any service.
And really, I'm not an attorney. I'm not giving any legal advice, but from my understanding, that you can't even use the seller's tax returns. The new owner cannot use the previous owner's tax returns to give to the buyer for due diligence without that seller's permission, that first owner's permission.
Right. That's a good point. I'm actually going through that right now.
Yeah. So.
I think another really important point of what makes a business good, and there is a caveat to this which I'll discuss, is people don't typically acquire a business if it doesn't have growth potential. They don't want to really acquire a business and flatline it, right?
Yeah, right.
The caveat I'm giving to this, and I'll just bring it up now so we can move on to everything else, is there's a difference between a financial and a strategic buyer, and we'll talk about this in depth in another session here. But a strategic buyer, which is usually a private equity company, or maybe it's a large business, let's say they do manufacturing, and one of their manufacturing parts that they have to buy as a part of their manufacturing is some type of metal fabrication work. And the product that they deliver, part of building that product may be a piece of metal.
Right.
And instead of buying that at a wholesale cost, they can now produce that actual piece or that component of their product themselves. So they may go acquire a metal fabrication shop so that they can lower their cost of goods.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they don't necessarily care about growing that business that does metal fabrication. They just want to strategically make an acquisition to lower their cost for what they're selling.
Yeah.
So in those cases, in those rarer cases, a strategic acquisition, maybe they're not looking at growth potential. But I would say maybe 8 out of 10 business owners or business acquirers are looking to buy a business to grow it. So what is the growth potential?
I disagree with you, Carey. I'd say that's probably more like 95%. 9.5,
Yeah.
9.9 of the buyers out
Fair
of 10 are looking to expand that business. So there's got to be growth potential.
And let's talk about some of the growth potential, right? I alluded to this earlier, but there's so many business owners, and you blew my mind earlier with that statistic. 40% of the business
isn't that
owners.
Crazy?
And you know what? I would almost guarantee those people that were born before
1964.
They don't know anything about digital marketing. They don't know new age advertising, right?
I talked to a business owner the other day. He's doing pretty good. He's doing I forget like $3.4 million in gross sales.
Solid
so he's
business.
doing okay. He has owned his business for like 25 years, and he goes, "Yeah, but I'm really concerned." Because, and I know I'm getting off subject, but he made me think of it. He goes, "I'm really concerned because I don't have a website. Should I create a website before I take the business to the market?" And I'm like, absolutely not. You don't need to create a website. The fact that you're doing the numbers that you're doing and you don't even have a website and you're doing no marketing and no advertising, buyer's going to be salivating because, imagine what a buyer's going to think if they did create a website.
That's one of your sales points.
They did, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the way to grow.
Yeah.
And I told him, actually, I would rather you not create a website at this point,
Right. So you got marketing and advertising, you got horizontal and vertical integration with different industries, opportunity to add on a second layer of staff, right? Can I add on more salespeople to increase sales? Can I add on more fulfillment people to help produce more product, right? There's so many different ways to grow a business.
Right.
But I think directly related to this, when you talk about growth potential, is scalability, right? What is going to be the level of effort that you have to put in to increase those numbers, that gross revenue? Of course, you think about CapEx, right? Mm-hmm. Machinery and whatnot, but how easy it is to scale a business is a critical component for growth.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that makes a good business. Is it scalable? Or do you see the opportunities to scale?
Right.
Another thing we always talk about is related to growth is competitive advantage. What difference does your business have than every other business on the street? What is your unique value proposition? Is there something that an acquirer or potential purchaser of a business can do to come in to create a competitive advantage for a business that has succeeded without a previous competitive advantage? Intellectual property, technology.
Trademarks.
Yeah. So many different things. So growth potential is such a huge part about this. And I think ultimately, we'll go with what you said. 99.9% of all business owners want to see that they can grow a business. That will define it in being a good business.
Right.
Other things to consider that may make a business deemed good or bad. Let's talk about industry stability. And we just went through a global pandemic with COVID, and we saw some industries get crushed, and we saw some industries thrive. And I hear you say all the time, not directly related to COVID, but related to transformative change, is can Amazon take over my business?
Well, I'm hearing that a lot from buyers. I've heard that a lot from buyers over the years is two things. They want it to be recession resilient / recession proof, or Amazon resilient,
the 100-pound
Amazon
gorilla.
proof. Yeah, that's and maybe not just picking on Amazon. They'd say Amazon, but I think in the general sense of just the internet taking over.
Yep.
That's why HVAC businesses, I think, are doing really well right now. Roofing businesses are doing excellent right now. Lawn and landscape businesses are great. Automotive repair businesses are doing great. I mean, you look at the industries that are doing great, and actually, maybe it's just me because those are the industries that I kind of work in. I love the blue collar trade type businesses.
Me too.
I love that. I have a passion for those type of businesses. But they're hot businesses right now.
Yeah.
It's a lot better than a lot of retail type businesses.
And
on the flip side of that, like restaurants as well. Like I don't sell restaurants. Like you and Tony sell a lot of restaurants, but restaurant can be put in that equator. Well, maybe not so much the recession resilient, but the Amazon resilient.
What's funny too is you look at a lot of the industries that you would expect to maybe not do as well during a global pandemic, and those are some of the ones that thrived.
Yeah, some of the restaurants thrived.
Well, I have a residential kitchen business, and they sell countertops and cabinets, and they had a very healthy business pre-COVID. During COVID, they hit it out of the park because people are at home and they're looking around and they go, oh, I think it's time to redo our kitchen. And they have some disposable income, and they had an increase of $3 to $4 million a year in 2020 and 2021, and now it's leveled off a little bit. So it's still solid business, but that little spike, like we were talking about earlier, you can directly correlate it to something like that.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting to look at different industries and how they're affected by environmental factors, and they're all things to consider when looking at a good business or not.
Right.
Another thing I would mention too is suppliers and vendors. A lot of businesses, their suppliers or vendors, they may be sole source. They may have one vendor or supplier. Well, what if that vendor or supplier goes out of business? Their whole business is built around it.
It's okay to have one supplier, one vendor, as long as there's other suppliers and vendors that could give you a similar type product or service in exchange of something happened to that company.
And have a plan for it in place, right? So when we're doing an analysis on a business and we see that sole sourced vendor that a business is relying on to generate their sales, we're going to say, make sure you have a backup ready to go. Maybe start taking some orders from that vendor just you can show that there's some continuity there.
Yeah.
Right?
And I can't remember I'm having a brain fart right now. I apologize, but I think it was like in 2019, there was a fire at the biggest manufacturer of the chemicals for the
in Texas, right?
In Texas, to clean pools, and it burned this manufacturing plant to the ground, and the chemical costs skyrocketed,
I remember that.
and it really hurt the pool cleaning industry. Mm-hmm. So you think that the things like suppliers don't matter? They do.
Without question.
They do.
Without question. Let's talk about a good business, right? One thing that you'll directly correlate it with is reputation. And it can be in the form of ratings. We know the power of a Facebook rating, of a Google rating. You look at a business and they got 2 stars and 25 or 30 2-star reviews. It's kind of hard to dig out of that hole.
I got to disagree with you, Carey. I look at a business, let's say a business is doing $7 million in gross sales and they got a 2.5 Google rating, but they're doing $7 million and they're trending up or they're staying the same as far as their financials. I look at that and I'm like, gosh, a new owner comes in and runs that business better. That's growth. That's more opportunity.
Sure.
They're doing that much sales with 2.5 stars. Could you imagine a new owner comes in? That's what I tell a buyer. And, because I've had those situations. I'm like, look at the numbers they're doing, and they're continuing to grow. Could you imagine you coming in there and running that business better and giving better service and blah, 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 blah?
You ramp up a customer service or success department and talk about elevating that. Yes, so there's an opportunity for everything. And it's the point of why we talked about subjectivity and what makes a good business, right? We just disagreed on a point, and it's very easy to see that you could turn a negative into a positive very easily. Right. And another thing, too, is when you talk about reputation, and this one may be a little bit deeper, what about the culture of a company?
Oh, I think culture is really important.
And again,
I've had buyers buy businesses because of the culture.
Because it's good or bad?
Because it's good.
Well, what if it's bad?
Oh, you know what? I don't want to I'm going to use this example, and when I use this example, hopefully whoever's listening is not going to know where I fit on the political spectrum. I'm just giving a story. I had a buyer, 2 buyers a couple years ago that were looking at a business to buy, and they walked in and there was a lot of Trump paraphernalia all throughout the space, like everywhere. Mm-hmm. And the buyers didn't buy the business because of that. They looked at it, and again, I'm not saying I'm pro-Trump or anti-Trump, I'm just stating with this story. The buyers felt like we're not Trump supporters, and they were like, we're okay with them being Trump supporters, but we don't know if we could fit into that culture because we're walking into a situation that was very obvious that the owner of the business in their office, there was a lot of Trump stuff, and then the employees had a lot of Trump stuff in their office, And the buyers walked in, and they were like, yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to tell the employees to take that Trump stuff down, and like that is, it's like, and it was like not a good culture fit.
But let me guess,
reason.
it was a good business.
It was a great business,
Which again defines the opening statement. There is a level of subjectivity in what makes it a good business. Now they may not have walked out and said this is a bad business. They just said it's not for me.
Right.
Because of
that. They didn't criticize. They didn't criticize the people. They just looked at it and said, I don't know if the employees there post closing would gel with us,
right?
Whatever.
And it goes into the culture of a company is a huge part of whether it's good or bad. You can come into a business that has employees that are dissatisfied or they're looking over their shoulder at another opportunity. Again, you can come in as a new owner, revitalize the energy and the culture of the company, and turn a negative into a positive.
And it goes back to what you said earlier. Carey, it's matchmaking.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Finding a good buyer and a good seller that it's a good fit for each other.
Yep. Without question.
But I think culture, it can be good and bad.
Yep.
If it's got a good culture, a bad culture, and I'm not saying the Trump thing was a good culture or a bad culture, it was just the culture.
Yep. One more point I think to bring up related to a good or bad business is facilities, and how it relates to if the owner of a business happens to own the real estate, they're maxed out on the amount of space that they could have to run that business. They need to go invest into additional square footage or a different facility to grow the business. Those could be challenges. Or if they don't own the business and they're leasing space from somewhere, there's 1 year left on a lease term, or there's tenure left on a lease term, but now they have a new landlord, and that landlord is a pain in the ass. So the facilities and the lease definitely have a big effect on whether a business can be considered good or bad, or maybe it's a good or bad situation. It won't completely negate the fact that it's a good or bad business, but it is something to look out for.
Right. At least if the business is dependent on the lease, that's something that we need to have a conversation with if there's only a short period of time left on that lease. The buyer is going to want to make sure that they have a long-term lease, and if it's an SBA loan, the SBA is going to require
10 years
a 10-year, whether it's a 10-year lease or a 1-year lease with 9 1-year options or a 5-year lease with a 5-year option. It's got to add up to 10 years.
Yeah.
So
the landlord representation and relationship with a tenant, especially when you're buying a business and the landlord and the current business owner don't have a good relationship, again, an opportunity for a new buyer to come in and establish a better rapport with the landlord, turning a negative into a positive. But again, looking at facilities, lease, structures, contracts, all of that helps determine whether a business is good or bad.
And I want to say, when we're talking about this, we're talking more from a buyer's perspective than good or bad in the general sense. I mean, there's a lot more things that you and I could be getting into about a good business and a bad business. We can get into employee handbooks and standard operating procedures being written down and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, the smaller type businesses don't have that stuff in place, and so buyers aren't necessarily giving them a black eye because of that. But if they did have it, it would be kind of like a plus.
That's a great thing to bring up. I mean, our job, because you and I primarily work with sellers, right? We love working with sellers.
Yes.
So all of these things that we're talking about
I love
today,
working with buyers that are looking at the businesses that I'm doing.
Right.
I'm not, it's not that I'm for sellers and against buyers. It's that I don't like looking for businesses that I don't have listed for sale that are listed by another broker.
Right.
For a buyer.
For a lot of different reasons.
I like working with for a lot of different reasons. So
but,
we won't get into that.
But in the fact that we say we like working with sellers, so when we're talking about what buyers are looking for in a good business, essentially what we're saying is, sellers, these are the points that we're giving you that you can use to make your business look better for the buyers that ultimately are going to be out there looking to acquire your business. And it's our job to help point those out, whether your business is ready to list today, tomorrow, or in a year from now. We want to help you get prepared for sale.
Right, exactly.
So ultimately, this has been episode 3. What do buyers look for in a good business? Again, a high level of subjectivity, but I think the information that we provided gives all of the sellers out there a really good indication of what you can do to better prepare your business for sale. At Boss Group International, we love to share our knowledge with you. And on this Boss Talk episode. We hope that some more questions have spiraled in your head, and we look forward to answering those questions for you.
And if you're looking to sell your business, please give Carey and myself a call. We'd love to talk to you. Really would.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.